Welcome back, college baseball Central fans. Another exciting interview here to kind of get us through the fall ball blues as we kind of work towards college baseball season. Here with the committee chairman, Matt Hogue. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Jake, Noah, it's a pleasure to be with you.
Obviously, you're the vice president of intercollegiate athletics for the University of Coastal Carolina. So you do a little bit of both, kind of multitasking during the baseball season. How long have you kind of been on the selection committee?
So my term started, I was actually notified back in March of 2020, which was interesting because it was right about the same time that we shut down as a nation when it came to the COVID pandemic. And I was kind of scrolling through my emails during that crazy week when basketball tournaments were being canceled and so forth. And I just happened to stumble across the email from the NCAA that I'd been selected for the committee. So it was a really great honor to get that note. My actual stretch with the committee began the following academic year. So my first NCAA tournament was 2021. That I was a part of with the selection committee, and it was it was a great opportunity to be a part of it. It was actually a committee that I had sought after and really wanted to have an opportunity. And fortunately, there was an opportunity that came up. For those that don't maybe realize kind of how the process works, typically the conference that you're affiliated with puts forth your nomination, not just for the baseball committee, but for any NCAA committee. Your home conference, which for us, of course, is the Sun Belt Conference, kind of handles that process. And they had put me forward as a nominee, and fortunately was selected. So you start out with a 4-year term. So this year, this will be actually my last year as a part of the committee in this go round, and was fortunate to be elected by my peers on the committee as the chairman for this year. There are some cases where you may have a committee member who pieces together a longer term. If you leave the job that you're in, typically what will happen is you would have to leave the committee, and then you'd be eligible to come back at some point if you're nominated by that conference that you left to join. But for the most part, you're looking at a 4-year term. So it's really exciting for me. Been a college baseball fan, number one, just like you guys, for a long, long time. Going back to when I was was a kid. And love the sport, and then it's almost a dream come true in a lot of ways to be involved at this level with not only our university where we've had a great program, but now nationally.
I think a lot of people view the committee as almost an organization that meets in secret, and they're kind of hooded figures in a room. How often do you guys get together and just kind of talk shop?
Sure. So we have several meetings throughout the year. There's typically one that occurs in August. We'll have another one that actually is coming up in November, which are scheduled by the NCAA. And those meetings cover a wide array of topics. Our committee, obviously, its number one goal is to select the field and monitor the championship execution, right, in close working concert with the NCAA championship staff. But the other part of it is we're college baseball advocates in many ways. We can't make everything happen. There's obviously a process, and there are other committees that determine rules changes and other legislation that may be affecting college baseball. But we can certainly make recommendations. We can certainly provide positive feedback from an informed group. So, there's a lot of time spent together throughout the year covering a lot of areas. We have an incredible relationship, obviously, where you guys are with the city of Omaha and CWS Incorporated that has been the engine behind this great American event for so long. So we spend time getting updates from them, what may be new with the stadium, what initiatives may be coming up. So, that's a great question, Noah, because I know a lot of people kind of get focused on those 3 or 4 days in May, and the bubble and all that sort of thing. But there's a lot that goes on through the course of the year. And a lot of it is, giving our input to how the championship should operate, what we feel is in the best interest of the student athletes. What are some things that maybe are positive changes or adjustments that we can recommend or make with the championship itself, so that all facets of it, from selection day to traveling to the regional site, what happens when you get to the super regional and on down the line, you're still intrinsically involved in that process all the way up until the time the trophy is handed out. So it is a lot of work, and we're all volunteer workers, right? We all do this because we love the game. Myself and the rest of our colleagues on the committee, we love the game. We care about what happens to the game, and we want to make sure that this event continues to be as special as it always has been.
You mentioned that you meet throughout the year. How often do kind of those early preseason rankings factor in towards kind of the end of the season at May? Because I know last year, obviously, LSU ended up staying number one pretty much throughout the year, but I know we've seen in the past teams kind of get that number one ranking then fall. So does that kind of affect into it at all?
I would say that the early season rankings, probably don't inform a whole lot in terms of the process. I can't speak for everyone on the committee in terms of how they maybe go about their own, personal research and evaluation. I know everyone, watches games intently. They pay close attention from the time the season begins. Obviously, going to try to stay on top of maybe some key preseason injuries. We've seen that, right, in the last few years, where some teams that and programs that maybe had a couple of top pitchers that were going to be All-American level arms, maybe had a season-ending injury or something like that. So I think you have to take all that information in stride. But really, until the games start playing and you can kind of get a feel for the rhythm of the season, who's playing whom, who's maybe showcasing their capabilities. That's when you really start to dive into, to what happens. And we'll begin as you get through the middle of the spring, probably after you have maybe about half the season under your belt. Then we'll start into our formal process, which also allows regional advisory committees to weigh in on what they're seeing. So that helps you kind of stitch together from all pockets of the country, good information from head coaches. The head coaches play a vital role representing the various conferences across the country. They play a vital role in helping us be aware of things maybe we're not aware of or that we couldn't get information on. I know it's very informative for me when coaches provide us, that kind of that eye test, who they like, who they see that's a good program, who maybe they've played against on a variety of cases. So you kind of start really honing in when you get to that level of the season. But hey, at the end of the day, guys, just like you, we're all fans of the game. We get excited when the schedule comes out. We get excited when we see some of those matchups that will be interesting to watch early in the season. You look at the rankings, of course. I don't want to give the impression that we don't pay attention to it. But how much you may put that into as an ingredient that early in the year is probably it'd probably be tough to use that as a metric that soon.
What are the kind of rules and regulations about talking in the middle of the year? Maybe you had a meeting last month, you don't have another one for a month. Are you guys able to have your phone calls and discuss anything? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think you're always going to have that because you've got opinions and thoughts from your committee that they may have ideas about things that are going to be on our agenda. Again, we've got 9 other folks on that committee that are incredible leaders in college athletics. Their resumes are stout. And many of them have served in capacities like this in other areas. You've got college football playoff committee members, past and present, that are part of our group. It's really an incredible collection of athletic administrators. So yeah, I think it's like anything else. You've got relationships in the business. You're gonna bounce ideas off one another. You're gonna constantly have discussions. And again, it's about a variety of issues. It may have nothing to do with how you actually go about selecting teams, right? So you're going to have those conversations. I think, there's certainly we don't feel like there's anything that binds us from discussing the process and the structure of how we manage the championship first and foremost. Or there may be issues that are pressing that we've got to have some conversation with and be prepared. It's not unusual for a committee member to say, "Hey, let's add XYZ to the agenda the next time we're together," right? We want to make sure that we cover a particular topic. So, I don't know that it's anything that's structured where you're talking to, all 10 members every week or anything along those lines. But certainly you're going to have those conversations, and I think they're helpful and fruitful.
How tough is it to kind of remain completely unbiased when kind of forming teams like this? Like, obviously you went to South Carolina. I'm sure there's like a little bit of Clemson hatred. How do you kind of remain unbiased when it's college athletics. Everybody always seems to kind of be biased with it.
Well, I think that's a great question, Jake. We certainly all do come from backgrounds, where we have, in some cases, we may have allegiances and what have you. But, I'll tell you, that's something that I can speak on behalf of all of our members that we're very serious about. You just simply have to allow professionalism to rule, right? And I think that there's still a great deal of that, obviously, in our business and in our game. And it's it's all about fair play and order. So I know that's the way that our committee members approach it. And there's also there's structural aspects of how we manage all of this that control that sort of thing too. There's a recusal policy that the NCAA works with when it comes to those types of connections that we take very seriously in the process. So, I think there's so much information and you spend so much time working through the decision process. You're there for 3 to 4 days. We're 100% focused on that the entire time. I personally don't spend a lot of time trying to communicate with anyone else at that time other than maybe my wife, right, to see what's going on, back home. But I think it becomes a discipline that you have to engage in. And I know everyone on our committee would agree with that to make sure that we are selecting the best teams to be in the championship. And you just can't let any of that other stuff filter in. But I also think we have a structure and we have a decorum with which we do it that helps keep that out anyway.
I'm probably going to get a similar answer to the one you just gave, but how tough is it when Selection Monday rolls around, Gary Gilmore taps you on the shoulder and says, what are we hearing? How tough is it to restrain?
We saw Mr. Cohen kind of get dragged through the coals with the last one, so I'm sure you're got to be ready for that one.
It is. It's that comes with the territory, right? This has a human element. Every aspect of it has a human element, right down to what happens on the field, and that comes with the job, and certainly I'll be prepared for the opinions that will follow once we get to Memorial Day weekend. And Noah, you bring up an interesting aspect to it because obviously we all have our programs that we run, right? And we've had folks on the committee who oversee university athletic programs that have strong baseball programs. There's no question about that. And the committee composition currently is the same way. And we've actually had some changes on our committee that are bringing in folks that have very strong programs. So it is tough, but again, it's the rules of the game. It's the discipline that we have to display in doing our job. And you really kind of have to block out some of that information. And, I tell our guys, if we're, a program that's going to be in the discussion potentially, guys, I'll see you on Monday night or Tuesday, right? So they know not to really reach out and contact me or ask questions or try to determine, where things may be headed. It's just kind of the oath that we have amongst ourselves, if you will.
So we talked about all the negatives to kind of being the head of the chair. Are there really any perks to kind of being the head honcho?
Yeah, I don't know that there's any negatives. I think there's challenges. Obviously, it's a position that comes with great responsibility to be on this committee, or really any NCAA selection committee for that matter. And the chair, obviously, you've got a heightened sense of those challenges and responsibility. But at the end of the day, I hope everyone can understand that any public illustration that I'm providing. It represents the collective, right? It represents the committee as a whole. It represents what we together have crafted and determined with all of the various input that comes in. So, in a lot of ways, I become the mouthpiece, and I hope folks understand it's not, that Matt says it had to happen this way or that I made a command decision. That's just simply not the way the process operates. So I truly believe, I'm always speaking for the collective of our group. I'm just the one who now kind of has the mantle, right? But I think the overall benefit to this is, again, like I said at the top, I'm a big lover of college baseball. I mean, I love the sport. I've always gotten excited about it. It's something here at my school that I've had a chance to be very involved in, especially with the growth and development of our program through the years. And, to me, that's really kind of the biggest perk of all is to be a part of this. An interesting story, long before you guys were probably born, back in the early 80s, when I kind of became really indoctrinated with college baseball. It wasn't on TV everywhere. You didn't have the kind of coverage that you have now. You had to watch 3 television channels. I'm kind of sounding like the old guy now, but I can actually recall sending an envelope and a check to the NCAA to order a College World Series program back when they played in Rosenblatt. And this was like 1984, I think. So you had Arizona State had players like Bonds playing for them, Barry Bonds, Oda B. McDowell, the Mississippi State great teams with Bobby Thigpen and Brantley, and the Thunder and Lightning guys with Palmeiro and Will Clark, were kind of in their prime. Barry Larkin playing for Michigan at that time. Those were some great fields that the World Series had. And I just became, really passionate and kind of caught the bug back then. And, I can remember ordering that program, and it's really kind of a cool circle that here we are, literally 40 years later. And, I have the great privilege and honor to be in this position to lead this committee in what is an incredibly important and humbling responsibility. So, it gives you a little bit of a background of how much it's meant to me through the years to follow college baseball. And, and Omaha is a special place for a variety of reasons to myself and our family.
That's definitely a great story to hear. You often think that the committee are people who you hear these rumors about how they overlooked my team, or they undervalued this scenario. So it's great to hear that the chair has a position of that fanhood almost, where you're still remaining professional. We view college baseball as a sport that has like 6 different national polls right now. How do you guys kind of centralize that? And is there one you value the most? It feels like every week we have one team ranked number 1 in 5 of them, and then that number 1 team is maybe ranked 7th in another one.
Yeah, I tell you, the proliferation of polling is kind of fascinating, over time. You can kind of go back to, I think it all started with, collegiate baseball, and then you've had them just slowly added through the years. And first of all, hey, the more coverage our sport can get, the more attention we can receive, the more power to all those areas. I mean, what you guys do and what everyone does as advocates of our sport is welcomed. And, you want that type of interest. You want to drive that type of interest. So, I don't really have an issue necessarily with how many polls. I think if you look at some of the NCAA statistics, they do have, the NCAA has kind of a way in which they sort of determine the ones that are going to be go into the record books, right? That for whatever reason have a certain level of stature. But again, I think for us as a committee, it's not as much about, it's certainly a criteria we can take a look at. But I think when we really get into the, the heavy lifting of our job, obviously we're going to use some of the official tools that are available. We're gonna look at the RPI. Everybody's familiar with what that is. We're gonna look at the obviously the data that comes from our regional reports. You're going to look at all sorts of information that will work as maybe a sorting tool. Maybe it helps you kind of put teams into a certain category. But the polling, I think, is more something throughout the season to maybe, going back to Jake's question earlier, that just kind of helps you inform and maybe gives you a little bit of a guideline of, who's hot, who's not, what's the ebb and the flow. But, I don't know that the polls necessarily are going to carry a huge amount of weight. It's another tool that's out there. What we're trying to do is find that aggregate value for a team and their resume. And if you bring the polls into that, that's very possible, certainly. But is it going to be an end all be all? And do you have to try to figure out a composite of the rankings? I'm not sure that's really kind of in our purview to figure
out. Where do you kind of see the future of RPI going? I know that we're baseball guys and we love our nerd stats. Do you kind of see it growing? Do you kind of see it diminishing in the future? Where do you kind of see RPI going from here?
Well, I'll tell you that there's certainly a heightened awareness of trying to take a hard look at it and what can be adjusted, if anything. How it can be measured and modified. I know that is definitely an issue that is at the top of the list for our committee. We are going to spend time evaluating that system. I think you guys. Certainly, as you watched last year with the with our decisions on selection day and even throughout the summer, that's an issue that has continued to gain steam, and I think it's something that we're going to earnestly take a look at. Can I predict the future as to what may happen? Or is there an ability to make adjustments this year? Is it more of a, down the road thing, maybe for 2025? I think that all remains to be seen. We've got to go through the right process with that sort of thing. But I can tell you that beyond a doubt, it is on the agenda of this committee to take a really hard look at. We understand that there are varying opinions about the usefulness of it, the calculation of it. And we're going to be looking at that closely.
Has the committee thought about releasing maybe on a week-to-week basis in, say, April, like the college football playoff does, and say, here's how we're ranking the teams right now?
That's something that has been discussed. We haven't reached any decisions along that type of concept. Obviously, you do see that happen in some other sports, as you mentioned, the CFP, and also you see the seeding, the top seeding listed when you get to the basketball as well. So, it's certainly an idea that has been floated. But, at this point, we don't have anything in our procedures that would allow us to put that forward. But again, I think as I talked about before, when we have meetings, you're kind of on line with the concept, Noah, and that is, these are the type things that we want to take some time to discuss. Is there an idea that we're picking up, from college baseball advocates out there that maybe bears, a level of discussion? We'll try to pull that into our discussion and see if there's any traction to it. So I think that's a great idea, though. I think anything that can, help spark interest and put more attention on the sport as we go down the line is important. As with anything, you have to look at the pros and the cons, and we would definitely want input from the whole committee.
You kind of mentioned the pros and the cons. A new thing that the committee started was releasing the HOTE sites the night before. What's been the feedback for that, and is that something that you personally like?
Yeah, I'm supportive of that. I think that when you have a quick turnaround, you need to give the regional sites and those institutions as much time as possible to be prepared for hosting a 4-team regional and getting all of the logistics, set up. So the quicker that they can have that decision rendered, the better it is. So I'm supportive of that. I think it helps logistically. It makes a lot of sense. And again, it's one more opportunity to kind of get college baseball, front and center. These are going to be the 16 sites. Obviously, that generates a lot of conversation. Conversation about our game is good. So I'm supportive of that, and I don't sense any desire to go away from that.
How does the impact of the tournament one year impact that conversation the next year? Of course, you can't say so-and-so team did well, so we're going to reward them a year later. But you think of a team like Ole Miss winning it all in 2022 as the last team in. Do you view that as an opportunity to say, okay, let's reward maybe a middle-tier SEC team as opposed to a higher-tier mid-major?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the one thing is the previous year, it doesn't come into play. Now, is there – we're all kind of understand human nature, right? We don't live in a vacuum, but again, I think that speaks to sort of the discipline process of what you're doing. We have to sit down and really focus on what's in front of us and what the body of work is. And I know a lot of people, they get frustrated with a term like that, but that's truly kind of what you're doing. You're having to assess a full comprehensive evaluation of what's in front of you. So you have to focus on that team in that year. And what they're bringing to the table. I think what may be forgotten sometimes in the process is a lot of the ingredients that maybe affected a team the year before to make the tournament or what have you. You may still have that same set of ingredients that's helping or hurting a team, whatever the case may be, the next year, right? It may seem like you're comparing the two seasons, but in reality, what you're doing is you're using the same metrics, the same tools, and you're applying those to what you have in front of you for that year. So I think everyone on our committee does a really good job of focusing on what we have in front of us and the seasons that have occurred and what the output is for that program and that team in that given year. You really have to do that. I think you have to work very hard to focus on those principles.
Does a non-campus host kind of affect how the committee views a team? I know Oklahoma State used to go to Oklahoma City, obviously Duke going to the minor league stadiums. Does that kind of affect the committee as all, or do you really kind of try and isolate the teams themselves and kind of let them handle the logistics on the back end?
Yeah, I think what the committee does is it reviews the bids, and we take into account number one is everything from a requirement standpoint being fulfilled in the bid. So as long as they have a qualified bid, then the committee is going to take that for being meeting their requirement, if you will, and then determine if it makes sense. There's a lot more obviously that's going to go into making those decisions, but the only thing that would really disqualify one of those situations, I think, is if it's not meeting the requirements of the bid. Now, does that mean there may be some deliberation or discussion or differences of opinion about, is it too far away from here or there? Are there other aspects that may come into play that you might have a committee member that has an opinion? Absolutely. I think those conversations are always going to be happening, but our goal really is to, once the bid is a legitimate bid, then we have to just make a decision on where that is.
How many of those bids do you guys get? Is it a roughly 25, or does everybody who's in the tournament or thinks they're going to be in the tournament send one just for due diligence?
Yeah, I would say the last comment you made is probably what we see the most is, most schools have a pretty good feel for what kind of season their teams are having. We certainly don't put any limit on who can bid. There's just a process you have to follow. There's a deadline you have to meet, to have your bid submitted. And I think any year, you're going to see a large number of schools that bid. I can't remember exactly the number from last year, but it's certainly well past 16, right? So I think everyone wants to be in a position that they're prepared if the opportunity presents itself. Not just on the on the regional round, but also the super regional round. You want to you've got to put those bids in at the same time. So you make sure you cover your tracks in the event that your team is playing well and gets to that point.
You mentioned that teams usually have a pulse on if they're going to host or not. Is there anything that the committee kind of lets coaches know as the season kind of rolls on, kind of like, hey, you're kind of on the outside looking in right now, or do coaches just kind of have a feel for it?
Yeah, there's not any information like that that's being provided. When I say they kind of have a feel, I think they take a look at how they're trending, and it's really, again, it's more making sure that you've taken care of the administrative duties required, so that you're not left out, or you're in a situation where the deadline's passed and all of a sudden, maybe you've had a 2-week hot period and you think you can maybe get in. So, there's not any. The only information that's being provided is simply questions will be answered by the NCAA staff. If there's logistical questions or maybe some clarifications, certainly schools can reach out and get that information. But there's no advisement or, hey, don't put one in, put one in. That we stay out of that, right? We're presented with the information when we get to selection weekend and work from there.
When you guys are drawing up those brackets, do you ever move things around to say, hey, that'd be a fun storyline? And how hard is it to resist that? Because we see if TCU is a 1 and A&M's a 2, we know that they're going to be playing each other in a regional. It just seems like it always works out that way. A&M and Texas could have played each other in the super regional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, you follow through the procedures, right? And I think that's what folks really need to understand is there's a framework with which everything happens in this process. So we have to go through and assure that you don't have multiple conference teams in the same region. Procedures like that you have to follow. There may be some others out there that there can't be Sunday play, for example, and you have to maybe adjust if that were something that came into play. So you kind of put it through those filters first. Certainly you're trying to take a hard look at how travel sets up. That's a big deal, particularly depending on what the geographic footprint or balance is of the teams in the field, which can change from year to year. So, you don't want to get too far flung with what you're doing with travel, and what you're ultimately could potentially impact student athlete experience. So, once you go through all those, that's really going to be the thing that kind of sets your bracket. And it's more about making sure the brackets themselves, each region is balanced. You wouldn't want to have, the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 teams, say, for example, in the RPI, all playing in the same region. That's maybe an extreme example, but that's the type of mindset. You want to try to have balance in the bracket. You want to reward the teams that deserve to host, and kind of go from there. Make sure you meet those other requirements. So it's kind of tough to really get into a situation where you want to start moving around because of potential matchups.
I will say the committee last year did a great job with that. I know I kind of did the math with the RPI, and it started to get down into decimal points. So just the balance of last year's tournament, I would say, was one of really the perks of it. And it's kind of great to hear that the committee doesn't chase storylines, that they look at resumes themselves. What impact does a star player have on a mid-major to kind of raise their profile? I know we saw Zach Neto at Campbell and then Brody Becht at Iowa. Does having somebody that's MLB draft ready on a mid-major kind of raise the profiles of some of these teams?
Well, I think in general they definitely raise the profile of people following those teams and the interest in those programs. Again, I don't know that's something that you could qualify as a factor that is going to help in what we determine, right? We're going to be looking at the team and really trying to focus hard on, what's the quality of that team. Again, getting back to kind of what is the aggregate value of that particular program. Now, granted, if you have star players like that, if you have great storylines in terms of what they bring to the table, that's going to add value to those teams. Now, how does that impact the process of are they in, where are they seated, where do they play. Again, I would say that's not really a part of our charge to take something like that and try to put some type of metric on it to evaluate, to determining what happens with the team. But it's going to make that team better, right? You're going to have a team that maybe has a more potent offense, maybe has a better pitching staff. Those kinds of things are what we're looking at, right? So it happens probably more indirectly, I would say, when you've got great players. Obviously, they're going to elevate the value of that team. But I would say that's not something that we as a committee are going to use as a determining metric on some of the decisions we have to make.
How do you compare two teams that might have the same record, but Team A is kind of on a downward spiral, but Team B just ran right through their conference tournament and looked really good while doing it?
Yeah, I think you try to scrub through, everything that's out there. Our committee, head to head is something that's there within our procedures that we can do. So, did they play each other? That's always a great place to start. How did they fare in their conference? Did they play well in their conference? Did they not play well? Certainly taking a look at how they're playing down the stretch. Did one team have key injuries at one time, and now they've been able to get back key players, right? We've all seen that kind of happen, especially late in the season with some teams that have played really well in the postseason. So you really just kind of start going down a list of all of the different tools and information that's available, and try to figure out is there a delineation point between those teams. I think every committee member, and that's one reason why you want to have, a nice, healthy size of your committee. We've got 10 folks in there that are looking at all that type stuff. And you're right, Noah, that's where it gets very difficult when you get down to those last few teams. And our committee then has the opportunity there, one member may notice something that another member missed. And that's kind of the essence of what we do. It's working as a collective body to make sure we're seeing all of the things that are out there. And having a regional aspect to it as well, I think also helps, because obviously if you're getting reports from the West Coast and you've got representation from conferences and our regions that we're broken into from those areas, then it may help if you didn't know as much about a team, especially when you start breaking it down to that level. Then another committee member may have information that's important. So it is hard, but you try to just keep going through all those different factors until you can find something that would legitimately separate those teams.
For the multi-bid leagues, how do you kind of value the conference tournaments? Do you see it as more of just another game, or more of as like an exclamation point?
Yeah, I think fans really lock in on the conference tournaments quite a bit, right? And that's the time of year when college baseball really takes center stage, and it's an exciting time. We all love watching the postseason tournaments, and I like to call it May Madness. Obviously we have our version of March Madness, but it's May Madness for us. And the answer from the committee's perspective is, it's a part of the resume, right? We don't really try to go into it, or we don't go into it with any sort of concept of this is a multi-bid league, this is not, right? You're still trying to evaluate these programs individually, and what are they accomplishing? Again, what is their aggregate value? As far as what happens in the tournament, certainly it can impact how we may view that value, but I don't think you can kind of start with a preconceived notion of, well, this conference is going to have so many in, so we're good here. This is more just kind of playing out the stream, right? That's not really the way that we approach it. But certainly a team that is playing well, that continues to play well, that's going to increase their value, right? Maybe back to Noah's point, I think a lot of times when you have rematches in tournaments, when you have games that help to compare teams, that can be of great value. Conferences are so big now, a lot of times teams didn't play each other. So if you're trying to use the head-to-head metric, conference tournament may give you that. which you didn't have before. So you can kind of see how those teams maybe match up against one another. So those are some of the things that I think we try to take into account. But it would never be dismissed as not being critical, because there's other pieces that come into play. You've got to think about, okay, maybe a team is in a great position to be in the tournament, but now you've got to think about seeding. Now you've got to think about some of the other aspects to it. So until that last game is complete, we're going to continue to add everything into the data machine, if you will, that we're going to use in decision making.
You talk about the size of conferences with realignment occurring on, it seems like, a daily basis these days. How do you view the future of college baseball and how they value a team like Oregon State, Washington State, where their futures are kind of unknown, but then also, do you see college baseball maybe moving towards a hockey or a wrestling model where we have unique conferences?
Yeah, I tell you, it is a wild time, across the whole landscape in college athletics, as everyone in my seat knows. It seems to be changing literally by the week. There are going to be some challenges to figure out. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind, we talked about it earlier, part of our procedures is, conference teams not being in the same regional, right? How viable does that become? Does that have to be reviewed? Because your leagues are going to be so large now, the math would simply tell you that's difficult to control, right? Or difficult to manage. So, I could see down the line in the future where maybe that becomes a scenario similar to what had to be dealt with in the basketball tournament when conferences started to grow. Again, and as we go into this year, it's kind of interesting is we're going to have this season and have the World Series and have our championship is going to be kind of the last one under the college athletic space as we know it. Next year, 24-25, I'll be able to hand the baton over to someone else, I suppose, when you've got to figure out again, who's in what conference and so on and so forth. But I still think that you're going to still follow the same process in terms of trying to evaluate who are the best teams, right? We don't spend a lot of time, as much as folks may think we do. We don't spend a lot of time focused on, what conference is a team coming from, right? Or how many teams are in this conference and how many are going in from this conference. That's not really a part of the selection criteria or the process. So, I would hope as you get into those scenarios in the future that, none of that will change. We'll continue to evaluate programs as they stand, what they've put out there. But I will say, I think, a lot of this will go back to, if you're serious about your program and you're invested in your program on the individual school level, you'll be able to mitigate some of that, right? You brought up a couple of programs. Oregon State's a former national champion, and Washington State's been strong. They've had some good teams here in the last few years, and anyone else really across the landscape. If the individual schools are serious about their program, they're gonna do what they need to keep their programs prominent. I truly believe that. I think we've seen the growth of the sport. We've seen schools take a great interest in college baseball. They're investing in college baseball, which is great. That all that does is enhance what the athletes can do and the experience that they have, which is ultimately what we like to see. So I think they'll figure out how to kind of live within those changing spaces. But it's going to get interesting, here in the next couple of years with the changes that are going into play. One thing to think about, guys, you mentioned the college tournaments, Jake. How are some of those going to be structured, right? If you've got 18, 20 teams in a conference, now obviously there are schools that don't qualify in many cases. So that's going to be something that could be interesting. Noah, as far as, what may become a different, structure out there, I know there's a lot of discussion, maybe not specifically with baseball, but, there's been some good ideas I think I've heard about maybe trying to align in some capacity with some of the federations within our country, similar on the Olympic sports side with how some of those sports operate and maybe structure themselves, maybe even how they handle rules and changes to the structure of their game. So maybe we see some concepts in the future that bring some of that into play. But it's definitely going to be a different matrix.
As we kind of start to see this cross-country travel and road games kind of tend to be not as equal, will you view a team like USC who has to travel, halfway across the country every weekend differently as it kind of goes on, or will you still kind of see them as, conference road games, regional road games?
Well, I think you, again, it's what kind of is in the picture for that individual program, right? So where are we evaluating them kind of in the whole process? What are we trying to take a look at? I think you definitely are going to look at some of those maybe more intangible factors. That hey, they swept a series. In one place, and now they're on the road again. That does take a toll. I don't think anybody can tell you that it doesn't. But I think the way we would approach that, maybe I could be wrong, but I think the way we would approach that as a committee is what ultimately was maybe the totality impact of that, right? What was the end of season impact of that? Did it impact them having a downturn of losing 4 or 5 in a row? But at the end of the day, the overall resume is still very strong, and they certainly deserve to be a tournament team. You may not spend a lot of time on something like that, right? 2 or 3 games that are a slump in the middle of the season. A lot of teams go through those ebb and flows, right? We see that every year, even the best teams. Baseball, it's kind of the nature of baseball in some regard. You're going to have some ups and downs. So it might not end up being a factor that really comes into play. But, is it reasonable that a committee member say, hey, remember when they had to play, 6 games in a row on the East Coast or whatever the scheduling format is? I hope, and some of the things I'm seeing from the conference realignment in terms of scheduling development, I think there's an effort by administrators to really take a hard look at mitigating some of that as much as possible, right? But also think it presents some opportunities. If you're traveling now to, maybe play, let's say, 2 series in a row on the West Coast or East Coast, whichever it is, maybe you pick up a midweek game that you normally would not have played. Maybe that's going to have some benefits to, our world of college baseball, where we get to see matchups that maybe beforehand we wouldn't have normally seen, because now logistically it's a little easier to do that, right? If you pick up a game in the middle of the week and you've got two schools playing that normally would have never played. I know that can help us because now we get data points we didn't have before. We've got matchups, we've got head-to-head options that maybe didn't exist before when you're trying to make decisions.
One last question. I think I already kind of know where you're going to go with this. What's been your favorite memory being the athletic director at Coastal Carolina, or if there's a memory that trumps on the committee side, just what's been your favorite memory of being around college baseball?
Well, you're right. You telegraphed that one somewhat, Jake. Obviously winning the title in 2016 is, at the top of my list. We've had some great things happen here, certainly at Coastal. With our move to FBS and football and what we've been able to accomplish, the last few years has been tremendous. But winning a national championship is something that everybody in our business and the business that I'm in strives to do. We're all trying to do that to some degree. It doesn't really matter what sport it is. And even I think even the administrators at schools that have had a history of winning, 20 or 30 national championships would still tell you that there's still an ardent desire to be the best of your industry, so to speak, and to win a national championship. So that's definitely number one for me. It was really just kind of an incredible run from the time we started in Raleigh for the regional. The thing I always try to remind people of though is, we talked about that a lot with our program even before, we got to Omaha and won it. That was always the goal. So from a mentality standpoint, from a vision standpoint, and Coach Gilmore deserves all the credit for this, but as long as I've known him going back 20 years, that was the standard that was set. Right. You talked about Omaha. You said Omaha when you came out of the team huddle, you had imagery and everything about your program that was built to get there. That's what you wanted to instill in your players, no matter how the season ended. And, we had a couple of years prior to that where, we had really good teams that weren't far away. Super regional didn't go our way. I can recall in 2010, Christian Walker hit a big home run for South Carolina that took us out. He's done pretty well for himself, by the way, here the last few years. So, those things are going to happen and the ball's not going to bounce your way, but we knew we had a program that was certainly capable. So it wasn't something that was as much a surprise or, some people like, hey, it was a fluke or anything like that. It's a hard event to win. Baseball it's a hard sport to stay consistent over a period of time when you're at the championship level enough to be able to land on top. And it was an amazing ride. And you know what? The cool thing is this year, for the first time since 16, I get to spend 16 or 17 days there with you guys in Omaha for once again. So that's going to be really exciting.
Well, thanks, Mr. Matt, for joining us. Once again, this has been Jake McKeever and Noah Darling. We're going to have a few more of these interviews coming out. But thanks again, Matt, just for providing us with some transparency with the committee. And it kind of seemed like the hoods came off. You got to put a face behind the committee.
Yeah, well, it's great, guys. I can tell you, they've got college baseball at the top of their list in terms of what they care about, and they want to do right by this process and by the sport. And, it's certainly great to be working with some tremendous colleagues, in that pursuit. And hey, we're only, a few months away now. We get ready February 16th to throw out the first pitch and get things rolling. So looking forward to seeing you guys in person soon.
Thanks, Mr. Matt.
All right, guys, take care.